This is the Fundamentals podcast, where we demystify crypto and help you navigate this ever-evolving internet-native economy. In this episode, I'm joined by Shawn Tabrizi, the lead developer at Polkadot. Polkadot is the first fully sharded blockchain. In other words, it's a multi-chain environment that enables scalability by allowing specialized blockchains to communicate with each other in a secure, trust-free environment. In this interview with Shawn, we discuss Polkadot's core value proposition, the main optimizations they have focused on, the concepts of shared security, interoperability, and unstoppability, Polkadot's economic model, how to value the utility of a blockchain network's native token, current growth drivers and challenges, plans for the future, and more. Hey, Shawn, welcome to the Fundamentals pod. It is great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really excited.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to get to discuss the details of everything related to Polkadot. Now, to start this session, I was thinking it would be great if you could just describe Polkadot's core value proposition from the perspective of the relay chain.
Sure. I think one of the interesting narratives that are coming out pretty recently is this idea of block space. It's a word, kind of popped up in this last year, and I think it's really important. I think if we look all the way back to the original white paper of Polkadot from 2017, I think that was always the goal. The goal was to create flexible, secure, and hopefully cheap block space for developers to build on top of. And so really that's kind of the main goal of Polkadot. But beyond that, I think, Polkadot and, the Web3 Foundation and kind of the larger mission is to achieve this Web3 future. There's a reason why blockchain came to the world. There's a reason why Bitcoin was created after the financial crisis, right? We want to provide more trustless solutions for users to build things on top of. Now, of course, it started with cryptocurrency, but obviously it transitioned very quickly through Ethereum and now to the current era into building other kinds of applications and technology stacks. I think Polkadot's all about furthering that mission forward and creating a more secure Web3 future and a much more scalable one. Now, obviously, the backbone of what Polkadot tries to, how it tries to achieve that is through things like shared security, secure interoperability, truly unstoppable Web3, primitives and nature, stuff like that. But, the main goal is to scale out this next primitive, this next technology and provide block space to everyone.
And with the mission of doing that, if we briefly compare to previously launched blockchains, what would you say are the top optimizations that you're really, really focused on getting right?
The top optimizations are pretty clear. So the first thing is parallelization. So if you go back out to Ethereum, obviously, the Polkadot's roots comes from Ethereum. Gavin Wood was one of the co-founders of Ethereum, the main CTO guy. He wrote the original Ethereum client. When he spun out Polkadot, he was really trying to push forward the vision of what ETH2 originally was supposed to be, which was supposed to be this sharded network, right? Now, why do we do data sharding? It's in order to enable parallelization, right? When you have a database and you have multiple transactions and they're trying to touch the same database keys, you obviously have this common issue where basically you get in a lock, right? Where you can't have two different operations touch the same key, or you worry about, some kind of overriding each other or some kind of, erase condition, right? So the solution to having parallelization and avoiding these erase conditions is by sharding the data, basically by isolating different parts of data into different locations and allowing saying, hey, as long as you're touching data in a different location, you can do all those operations in parallel, right? So that is the first step, parallelization. But then we made another decision on top of that, different from Ethereum. Ethereum was originally supposed to be a homogeneous sharded solution, right? Where every single shard of Ethereum is supposed to be like an EVM. In Polkadot, we took it a step further by having a heterogeneous sharded solution, where every single parachain, which are our shards in Polkadot, can be a completely different logic, state transition function, blockchain, right? And so that really allows you to customize at every single shard a different logic layer around that shard and data, right? And we were able to achieve that using new technologies like WASM, which was another really important decision point, where WASM is a really well-adopted, flexible VM environment, much more robust, much more widely used than things like the EVM, and allows for perfect, execution of things like a blockchain environment because it's sandbox, because it's safe, because it's deterministic and stuff like that, right? And then finally, the use of Rust and stuff, making sure that everything is fast and efficient at the core protocol level. We use Rust, at least in all of our main technologies, in order to make that happen. So really, it's from parallelization, making things application specific through the heterogeneous shards, choosing important platforms like WASM, and of course, backing it all with strong, robust languages.
Got it. That is really clear. So what I want to do is tag on to the perspective of a shard, so an individual Parachain project. How would you describe the problem from their perspective that your model solves?
Okay, that's great. When you're building a new blockchain, there's a ton of problems that you'll run into, right? First is just building the technology stack, right? I had a presentation in the past where I kind of described the way that blockchains were developed in the past. It was like Bitcoin was the first from zero platform. And then you saw a bunch of people spin out their own Bitcoin fork, right? You have Litecoin, you have I think Namecoin, or all that kind of stuff, where they basically take the same software, kept it mostly the same and tweaked just a little piece of it, right? But we know that's not really an efficient way of doing blockchain development. You're basically taking some code which was meant for, problem A and trying to, change it and fix it for problem B, and you end up with a product that's kind of, probably not the best solution. So one of the first problems we try to solve in the Polkadot space is by creating a flexible SDK for blockchain development, which is called Substrate, right? And this platform was designed from the ground up to be a really flexible, modular, extensible SDK for building fast and efficient blockchains. And it doesn't even have to be that you build a blockchain with Substrate, it has to be on Polkadot. There's a lot of people who have launched their own blockchains or other alternatives using Substrate outside of the Polkadot ecosystem. But it was important that within the Polkadot ecosystem, if we're going to have many different blockchains exist, of course we need to have an SDK making it easy for them to develop at whatever level they want. So it can be that you just modify things in a couple of hours and it's done, or it could be that you modify things for months and change everything about it and still it's compatible and working with Polkadot. So it's kind of, choose at what level of modification and extensibility that you want. But again, Substrate is designed from the ground up to be something like that, right? So that's the first problem. Next is the bootstrapping problem. The bootstrapping problem basically is the issue that new blockchains face when they're trying to launch their network. So if I'm trying to launch a blockchain, obviously one of the most important things for people to build on top of or to use my platform is how secure it is. And we know that there's a relationship between security, the finances of that network, right? If the token value is too low and the overall market cap is too low, it can be very cheap to attack a network, right? And that could, basically, stop anyone from actually using it. Whenever you launch all these new blockchains, if we believe there's a multi-chain future, we believe that there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of blockchains. If every single one of these chains needs to individually have $1 billion market cap to be secure, where is that money coming from? This is not a sustainable thing. And in fact, I think that if we look at the blockchain space, the number one scaling problem in the entire space is actually financial scalability. I don't think there's enough money to secure all these different chains and all these different projects that are out there. So obviously Polkadot solves this problem with this concept of shared security, where basically any parachain, any shard on Polkadot inherits the full security of the Polkadot network and can basically operate without needing to provide any security itself and get that backing. So if you are a one-person project who's doing small work in your local community, and somehow you get a parachain slot, you get the backing of the entire Polkadot multi-billion-dollar network securing your chain as well. And we have guarantees around the security of your shard on Polkadot. So that's obviously another very important problem that's being solved. And the last one is interoperability. So when you have all these different blockchains, at a certain point you're going to want to start reaching over and talking to other blockchain platforms too, right? You're going to have your own community, but you're not going to really get real value until you start bridging those communities and your own tokens and other kind of stuff and assets to other chains. And now there are a lot of bridge solutions for all the most popular chains. Like if you're Ethereum, you're not really worried about that because people are going to make bridges to you, right? But if you think about, 10,000 blockchains and each of them have to make their own custom bridge to each other chain, it's an exponential, scaling problem. It's a very complex problem to solve. So what Polkadot does is tries to establish an interoperability layer at the protocol level to allow all blockchains to communicate with one another, to interact with each other, and to have a bunch of security guarantees around the interaction. So you have things like XEMP, which is a generic message passing protocol, XEM, which is a more specific but still open messaging format. And then, of course, a bunch of message handling things like proof of delivery and message handling at the protocol level, which really allows interoperability to work efficiently in this space. So I think those are kind of the problems that Polkadot is trying to solve for the end parachain developer.
Got it. Now, you are really actively both enabling and pushing for a multi-chain blockchain future.
Yeah.
And at the moment, if we look at the space, there are varying opinions. You have the monolithic approach where the belief might be more towards a winner takes all. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, which is you. What I would be really keen on understanding is how you're thinking about the future of the blockchain space and how it will play out and what kind of role Polkadot will have in a crypto native economy.
Yes. I think one of the really sad things about blockchain today is that through tokens, it somehow encourages this maximalist mindset, right? Because if you invested in token X at time A, and it could be 1 or 2 years or 10 years later, and a truly better solution has come out, which is really going to actually solve the problems of the world of Web3, you're not interested in that chain winning. You're interested in your chain either stealing all those ideas or killing the other chain and keeping around because you're invested in that token, right? And I think this is a really, kind of toxic behavior. And if I had to, point out one problem in the space, it's like basically if you're a genius and you're a crypto expert and you can build a whole blockchain, you're incentivized to build a new one, not to contribute to or help push forward existing ones, right? That's a really shitty place to be in terms of how you want to encourage the game theory of making this technology better, right? Now, that being said, there are some things in crypto which still enables this. For example, everything in crypto is basically open source. So one way or another, ideas do, make their way over to other spaces, but you do get this maximalist behavior. I think that people who are still maximalists are basically, betting on the wrong horse. And I think it's basically proven already. I don't think if you look at the current landscape of the blockchain ecosystem, you can really confidently say there will be one blockchain, or Bitcoin will be it all, or Ethereum will be it all, right? Like, there are so many new blockchains coming out with different value propositions, with different trade-offs and ideas, and I think that's good. I think just like when you want to choose what server you want to run your website on, of course you have a few of the big guys like AWS, Google, Microsoft. You have a bunch of small guys, regional guys who have different optimizations, benefits. Like, if you want to have a GPU farm, you probably don't use the some classic guy. Like, there's a bunch of different benefits to be had, and I think that what we will see is probably many different blockchain platforms, all with different optimizations and use cases for different needs. And I'll give you a few examples. Like, one could be like, one of the sliding scales could be like, security, right? How secure does the network have to be? The more secure it is, kind of slower it operates, the more expensive it is to do things. But sometimes if you're doing like network state level transfers of trillions of dollars, you probably want something really secure and a little bit slow. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of people interested in gaming, right? And that probably is much less secure, but much more high throughput, much more optimized for certain things. Then you have other kinds of applications like identity layers, like that, which might have different cryptographic primitives or different needs. So I would say that probably you're going to see a bunch of different application-specific chains which are going to come out, which is going to satisfy that. And of course, all of these chains are going to eventually communicate and interoperate with one another.
I think that's a very beautiful picture of the future of blockchain, and I would personally say that I hope that comes to fruition. Now, I want to speak about decentralization, because I listened to a talk that you gave at ETH Denver earlier this year, which was actually a great one. I'm going to link it into the show notes. And I'm quoting you, you mentioned that decentralization is not a goal, it's a tool, and the goal is unstoppability. So could you briefly elaborate on that and why unstoppability is so important?
Right. I think it really goes back to, again, we have to remind ourselves why we are in this space, right? Like, we have learned time and time again that when power is centralized, when a few individual actors are trying to be good for the world, that they often take advantage of it and they hurt the masses, right? This is happening to us actually even today, right? Like, we have so many governments you can list that right now that are hurting their citizens because they're overspending, overprinting, overborrowing, overlending, like all of these things where you trust the government to do well onto citizens and they just don't do well on the citizens. Like, that is the original value proposition of Bitcoin, to eliminate the central parties from access control. And that is also the value proposition of things like Ethereum, computation layers, where you can actually have things like smart contracts and stuff being executed independent of an individual actor. Like, you might not trust the law system to actually enforce things correctly. I would say this, like, if you're a citizen, you're not worried that your money is going to be taken out of your bank account. But Edward Snowden was a citizen at some point, and just because he whistleblowed some information about the military, suddenly he now is exiled into basically Russia, in hiding, where all of his money was taken. He has no contact, he can't fly, and this made, like, and again, I'm not trying to paint a picture on like, is this good or is this bad, who's on what right side, but like, you can imagine if it can be done to one person for whatever needs, it can be done to anyone for whatever the interests of the people who are in power are, right? And so we think about building these systems. What the goal is, we want it to be unstoppable. We want it to be that no party, even the powers that be, the existing powers, can stop a product from happening. This is like, right now in the US government, they're talking about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. They should ban it. They should regulate it. They have no idea what they're talking about, because you can't regulate these technologies. You can't stop it. You can put a law banning it. And guess what? That's the same thing they did in the past, where they basically banned privacy. They banned cryptography. I don't know if you know this, in the past, when cryptography first came out, it was actually a military tool. It was not legal for citizens, private citizens, to use cryptography to encrypt their data. And we see that it just doesn't work. You cannot stop people from using technologies. It's not a thing. So unstoppability in this case is resilience to attacks, resilience to the existing powers from stopping your technology. Now, decentralization is one of the ways you can do that, right? If you have many hundreds or thousands of nodes across the US government can't just press one button and close them all down. They have to go house to house to stop it. But I think decentralization is more of a sliding scale. For example, if I were to tell you there are 10 nodes running a network, I think you and I would agree probably that's not decentralized enough. Like, probably the government could stop 10 different nodes. If I said 1,000 nodes, it's better. If I said 10,000 nodes, I think that we're getting to the point where, like, basically the government doesn't have the power to stop 10,000 computers across the world, potentially in private homes, potentially in private individuals, to stop the network from happening. Now, if I were to say 1 billion nodes, I don't think that you would say that's much more secure than 10,000 nodes. Like truthfully not, right? But the scaling issues and how complex running a billion nodes are, like billion block producing nodes are, is much worse for a network. And actually, these scaling effects are exponential. So having a billion nodes on a network actually will make a blockchain not work. It won't run. It cannot handle that kind of thing. So when we're talking about decentralization, it's not like decentralization is the goal, that every time you add a node, it's better for the network. Actually, what we want to do is find some kind of threshold, which is soft and can always change, can always be, something you have to evaluate. But basically, that leads to unstoppability. And again, decentralization is not the only tool there. There are other tools like, for example, privacy layers, right? Mixed nets, the cryptography that you're using. There's a bunch of other things on top of decentralization which also lead to unstoppability. But the real goal, I think, is unstoppability. And I think that, we overblow this word decentralization as the end all be all, which I don't think it is.
I think that's a really great point of view and an important one to emphasize as well. So like in the equation of what adds up to unstoppability, decentralization is only one variable. And from Polkadot's perspective, what are the other variables in that equation?
I think it comes down to a lot of things. I think privacy is a big one. I think privacy is one that we haven't seen enough of in the space, and I think it will come out more. Now, privacy is kind of difficult because privacy usually always implies more complex logic. It implies more complex computation, right? Like basically, if you have blockchain A, which does like throughput, X, worse performance is something that we're not really ready to handle at this point yet, right? Beyond that, I think we need to look at the cryptographic primitives, right? Like, I think, original Bitcoin was using like SHA-56, Ethereum is using Kekkak, now we have like SHA-3, there'll be more, and then at some point there'll be, kind of this concern about quantum cryptography and quantum, resistance, so that's going to be a new kind of talking point at a certain point, but that obviously, if the government can break quantum and can actually break all this cryptography, you can basically break any blockchain, right? That is Satoshi's tokens and everyone's tokens basically gone, right? So that is yet another point of unstoppability. I think also it's the ecosystem and community, right? Is there a you can build all the technology stack correctly in terms of technology being decentralized and secure and unstoppable, but is it all backed by one company? Is it all funded by one foundation? In that case, the government then has another attack to basically stop all the development of a project. So the project could be all the right things, but if they stop the development of it, then basically the project is dead in the water, right? So there's a whole bunch of different layers of unstoppability, which I think Polkadot has always focused on. I think that when we look at all the different aspects of the Polkadot network, the community, the technology, we focus on what will ensure that if everything went wrong, Polkadot would still continue to grow.
Got it. That's great. It makes a lot of sense as well. Now, given Polkadot's architecture, which apps are best suited to be built on Polkadot?
So Polkadot really is a security provider. And so I think that, really it's not applications built on Polkadot, but platforms built on Polkadot, other layer ones, right? And on top of those layer ones is when we're going to actually see what we say like traditional user applications, right? But I think that to start off with, really layer ones are what we're trying to do here. And specifically, we're looking at application specific layer ones, like chains that may be tuned for a specific problem space and may want to facilitate a bunch of applications in that problem space, whether it be DeFi, identity, Oracle networks, that kind of stuff. Like all those kinds of primitives can be tuned for Polkadot. Now, one more thing I want to mention is I think that Polkadot is also well tuned for facilitating truly Web3 applications, not just DeFi. And I think that this is another thing that happens in the space. We too often conflate DeFi with Web3. Like DeFi is not what Web3 promised. DeFi is just one arm of the entire Web3 space. The issue is that we only see DeFi today because everyone is doing this fee model, right? So if we look at like Ethereum has become a DeFi hub. It has not become a Web3 hub because in order for you to launch an application on Ethereum and for users to use it, they need to pay pretty high fees because once Ethereum gets used and once the traffic gets up, the fees go quite high. I mean, I'm sure you might remember, like, I think I at some point updated my ENS name and I paid $100 for that. How are you going to have people, use ENS, which is like, some kind of, rudimentary identity system, if they have to pay $100 to update it? Like, this is not, accessible to anyone outside of the top, bag holders in the space, right? And so basically, because Ethereum has this like fight for fee system, you basically only encourage applications where transactions to those applications make you more money or make you more value than the fees cost. And this basically in the current era is only DeFi. This pushes away things like identity layers, like charity chains, like other kinds of, applications which provide actual good and services to the world, but doesn't make them money, right? We can think of a million, common good use cases for those kinds of things. And so Polkadot is kind of different in that we moved away from the pay-as-you-go fee model, and we have these Parachain leases, where a Parachain can lease a slot for 2 years. And when you lease a slot, you're not actually even paying a fee. You're just locking up the bond of that token for those 2 years, and you get all of it back at the end. And what this allows for is when you have a project launching on Polkadot, you basically know for the next 2 years that you have guaranteed block space and you have guaranteed access to, allowing your users to access secure block space. And you don't have to pay any fees. It doesn't matter if the congestion goes up or down. We've guaranteed and basically allocate that block space for you already. And so I think we can enable a bunch of applications beyond DeFi into the Polkadot ecosystem. And again, that's like things like identity, things like Oracle networks, things like charity chains, governance DAOs, etc., which really they're not competitive in the fee market.
Yeah, and looking at the current Parachain landscape, where are you seeing the most kind of traction or activity outside of DeFi?
Right. Yeah. So obviously there's a bunch of DeFi stuff on Polkadot. Everyone's trying to make their stuff. But beyond that, we have identity chains. I'll name like Kilt is an example of identity chain that just recently partnered with Deloitte. You have a real world representation of assets. So this is a little bit away from DeFi, but like actually trying to tokenize things like contracts or home deeds or stuff like that. That kind of stuff is existing on the chain. Prediction markets, a robotics chain. There's a chain on Polkadot that's trying to launch a rover on Mars and basically allow people to control it by paying fees onto the system and basically imagine it's a common good Mars rover that anyone can access if they want to do research for their own thing by paying some fee for that. That's super interesting. You have proof of personhood chains, which are trying to solve the identity issue, the disablement problem across chains. I've seen a bunch of social networks, launch on Polkadot more recently. Bridge hubs, which are connecting like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other chains to Polkadot, like all these different things. I think that let's go back to like social networks. When we think about social networks, these are the kinds of things where you can't expect users to pay $100 to post a tweet, right? But if we can create sustainable block space allocation models, I think you can actually start seeing the creation of truly decentralized social networks on platforms like Polkadot.
Got it. And I want to speak about the builder's perspective quickly. And more specifically, how is your Substrate blockchain development framework different from other app chain development frameworks, for example, the Cosmos SDK?
Right. I'll start by saying I think that the more SDKs there are, the better. I think that just like web frameworks and all that kind of stuff, I am happy and I encourage and I support the creation of many different blockchain frameworks, especially if the frameworks are solving different levels of issue. Like, for example, you might imagine there's frameworks that are more simple, but also more opinionated, right? So it's much quicker to go off get going, but then also, it's not as customizable, it's not as flexible. Also, you have the opposite side where it's much more flexible, that kind of stuff. I think one of the current issues though with SDKs right now, blockchain SDKs, is that they're all usually pretty opinionated and by the platform that built the SDK, right? So you mentioned Cosmos SDK, they're pretty influenced by the Cosmos ecosystem and their protocols. Substrate SDK is obviously pretty influenced by Polkadot. So when we talk about the difference between the SDKs, beyond the basic stuff like, they're written in Go and we're written in Rust, you start going down to the nitty-gritty of the protocol details. And if I had to mention why I think some of the advantages or differences between Substrate and Cosmos SDK, I would say things like they use Tendermint as their consensus layer. We have our own Babe grandpa consensus. Theirs is instant finality. Ours is kind of more like the block production is separate finalization. And I think this has been really relevant recently with if you saw the Ethereum debacle with their finality issue. Blocks are still being produced on Ethereum, but there was a finality issue. Something on Cosmos using their SDK using Tendermint, basically you would stall the network. You wouldn't be able to produce new blocks until the next block is finalized. So they call it instant finality. They call it a feature. I call it actually a problem. So I don't think that's a great thing. Also, they don't have shared security in their ecosystem. Whereas, if you build on Substrate, if you want to, you don't have to, of course, but if you want to join Polkadot, get the shared security, you can do that quite easily. I also think that Substrate is a little bit more modular and flexible than something like Cosmos SDK. We've seen people build proof of work chains with Substrate, DAG chains, like the decentralized acyclic graph chains with Substrate. We have multiple database options, that kind of stuff. Now, that being said, I would say that I do believe that Cosmos today is probably easier to build on. I think it's easier to go from 0 to 1. But I would argue that, I think Polkadot is, or Substrate is easier to go from 1 to 100. So I think that exactly, actually, this is perfect. I mean, there's two SDKs here. I think Cosmos is a little bit easier for the more novice developer. And I think it's great for that purpose. I think that Substrate is a more robust kind of if you really want to get into the weeds of stuff and change things, and that's also great for the right developers as well.
And on the same topic of developers, what are the different teams at the moment and their roles that are contributing to the core development of the Polkadot relay chain and then also the Substrate toolkit?
Yeah, so we're trying our best to keep ourselves decentralized and provide funds to the whole ecosystem, right? I think if we start at the beginning of where Polkadot came from, we have the Web3 Foundation, which is kind of the research arm. They do grants and architecture and research. They are also thinking about and focusing on things beyond Polkadot. So as I mentioned, once Polkadot is kind of done, the work isn't over. Building the scalable blockchain network is just the beginning of the Web3 future. We need things like mixed nets, privacy layers, verifiable delay functions, verifiable randomness functions, new cryptographic primitives which are quantum resistant. I think Web3 Foundation is all like, we have a bunch of really smart PhDs who are interested in all of that research and even doing research into that beyond what we're actually executing on today. Now we take that research, and a big chunk of the core development work is happening through Parity Technologies, which is a technology arm, an engineering arm, which has done a huge amount of the core engineering for Polkadot, has built the original implementation for it, has built a bunch of developer tools. They do developer advocacy, education. They do some business development and marketing as well. But that's actually been ramping up more recently. But really, at the core, Parity is an engineering organization that's built a lot of the core technology there. Now, that being said, there's also Web3 Foundation also funded other implementations of Polkadot. So we have ChainSafe, which is another organization which is building a Go implementation. Soramitsu is another company building a C++ implementation of Polkadot. And we're trying to, of course, have many different clients available out there. Then you have the Parachain teams. There's over 40 Parachains currently active on both Kusama and Polkadot. So obviously all of them are contributing and building an ecosystem, pushing things back to Polkadot. There's over, I think, 150 different teams in what we call the Substrate Builders Program, which is kind of like a accelerator or startup accelerator for people building in the Polkadot ecosystem. And they're all individual teams building things from like block explorers to APIs to other blockchains, like a bunch of different tooling, right? And you have this thing called the Fellowship. The Fellowship is a treasury funded, so the on-chain Polkadot treasury funded, employment. Like basically, if you're part of the Fellowship, you have basically shown that you're contributed to the Polkadot ecosystem, and the Polkadot treasury will actually pay you per month a salary for continuing to work and contribute to Polkadot ecosystem. So basically you have all these individual contributors who are not part of companies, who are still contributing as an individual contributor, like, they're making individual PRs, or they're just, kind of like these like anonymous warriors that are going out there and actually getting paid by Polkadot to contribute. And then finally, the treasury is also being used for individual bigger proposals, which, are usually teams or individuals who are asking for like grants or asking for, basically a chunk of money to do some kind of work. So anywhere from, again, individual teams to actual individual users, we kind of have funding for all of them. Some of it through treasury, some of it through existing tokens, some of it through businesses, right? And I mentioned it all goes back to unstoppability, right? Like, I'll say this. Imagine today if Web3 Foundation and Parity completely evaporate. We have already put into place an on-chain treasury, which can continue funding individual users through governance to build a Polkadot. I actually have this book here. Let me pull it out real quick. Which one is it called? The Starfish and the Spider. This talks about, it's a great book if anyone wants to read it. It talks about decentralized organizations, right? But actually it describes that no decentralized organization starts decentralized. You can't build a product started decentralized. It's too complex. It's too much. There's no vision. There's no direction. It just becomes chaos, right? You always start with some kind of thought leader. You always start with some kind of person who sets a pace and sets a direction, right? And at a certain point, and this is the hardest part about building a decentralized organization, you need to let go. You need to say, hey, the momentum is there. Now we need to let go so that we don't let any individual stop or halt the development of that decentralized organization. And so I think we've done that. We've transitioned from Web3 Foundation and Parity being the trendsetters to now having all the tools available through on-chain treasury, through on-chain proposals, that if these teams existed, it would be a little bit tough, but I think that Polkadot can continue to be funded and exist and encourage developers to build on top of it. So that's really the goal of what we're trying to do here. And so I think if you were to ask me the same question 2 years from now, it would be much more about the community and building, and it'd be much less about individual companies and organizations.
Yeah, and let's move on to speak about the financials of that, which
Sure.
you meant there, and economic sustainability in the long run. Can you just, before we go into the details, describe Polkadot's current economic model and how you're thinking about ensuring sustainability in the long run? And maybe kind of related to that is, what do you think economic sustainability for a blockchain means in general?
Yeah. So I think we're ultimately talking about the DOT token, right? If we're talking about the economics of Polkadot, right? So the DOT token has kind of 3/4 utilities. You can bond it for parachains. You can do staking. You can do governance. And by the way, this is not some bullshit governance. Like, there's a lot of chains out there that say, oh, we do governance, and they have some token vote, and then that vote basically doesn't actually lead to anything. It's just a vote on, this would be cool if we did it, and then people actually have to build that. We have a governance which is implemented on chain. It can actually upgrade our chain through governance. You can actually make changes to the chain through our governance system. And finally, the last thing is, I guess it would be like, the token is itself transferable and has a bunch of other kind of secondary use cases, like things like, if you want to create an identity, if you want to do like other kinds of utilities on Polkadot, you pay in the token, right? So those are the main use cases of the token. Polkadot itself also has, I don't know if you know this, built into the logic of the chain an incentivization on how the token should be used, the distribution of that token. So I mentioned across those different things, we actually encourage on-chain through the game theory logic of it that 50% of the tokens we want to be staked, 30% of the tokens we want to be locked into parachains, and 20% of tokens we want to be free and used for other kinds of transfers or for other utilities. And the way we encourage that is actually through the inflation model. So we actually know, like, we can look on chain how much token is actually stored in each of these different areas, right? Like we can see how much token is stored in parachains, we can see how much token is stored in staking, right? And we will adjust the inflation curve of Polkadot based on that distribution. So if too many people are staking, we actually lower the inflation so that it would actually push people, like they would get actually more rewards if they push things into parachains. Similarly, if too much people are in parachains, then we also lower the curve. So there's some kind of optimal point where you basically have the highest inflation, which encourages users to actually distribute tokens in a certain way, right? Now let's talk about, I guess, the value proposition of DOT, right? So why is DOT valuable, right? I think this is a question I think if you ask a lot of teams out there in the blockchain space, they actually don't have the right answers. Like, why is your token actually valuable, right? What brings value to it? And again, a lot of them will say, oh yeah, we have a DAO, right? Man, I won't go into it. But why is Polkadot actually valuable? Well, I think we could agree that secure, flexible block space is valuable. Like it's not something easy to achieve. If you want to launch your own blockchain, it costs millions of dollars. It costs, tons of engineering work. It costs tons of community collaboration, all that kind of stuff. It's extremely difficult. So if you could just go and buy secure block space, I think that there's a market for that, right? In the space. And that's what Polkadot provides. Polkadot provides this block space market, shared security to anyone who holds DOT token. And the only way to access that block space market on Polkadot is with the DOT token. So I think if you believe block space is valuable, then you would say the DOT token has value as provided by Polkadot, right? And then of course, if you have a valuable token, then you can do things like provide security. You can actually do things like have a staking framework where people put their money where their mouth is, secure the network, act in a good behavior to the network, right? Worry about getting slashed if they do bad things, and actually bring security to the chains that are being secured. So I think the DOT token itself has a pretty clear value proposition, and it's used in really clear utility ways.
Yeah, so if we think about value accrual from a blockchain network's perspective, what you're saying now is that the value accrues from the network's native tokens utility, right?
The token itself needs to be useful. You need to be able to clearly describe what it is used for. So I can say DOT token is used for allocating block space. That is valuable. I think that when you look at any token, you really need to ask that question. Why is that token important or valuable?
Okay, now let's speak about fees then and how they fit into that picture of value accrual. And for context to where I'm coming from with this question is that probably most investors have noticed that blockchains, including Polkadot, have raised very large amounts of VC funding, right? And as venture funds are profit-seeking investors, their investment thesis has traditionally been based on companies being able to generate large amounts of revenue at some point in the future. But as we've learned over the years, blockchains don't necessarily fit into that exact model that venture investors are used to in like Web 2. So I'd be keen on hearing how you think about generating fees and capturing revenue at Polkadot and how necessary that is for generating value for the whole network in the long run. Are they something that need to be maximized, or do you see fees and revenue as maybe secondary when comparing to the value of the native tokens utility that we just spoke about?
Yeah, I do have comments on this, a few different aspects. I'm not the best person to answer this, so definitely feel free to question me if I'm saying anything that's weird here. I think that when I hear your question, it kind of harkens back to like the Web 2 model, right? Not even the Web 2 model, just the traditional business model, right? You have VCs investing in companies. These companies have stock. The stock goes on market, people sell the stock, and you want value to go up. You want that these companies are showing that they have high profit, and the profit goes back to the company, and it gives value to the stock, right? Like, companies like Apple are extremely valuable because they have like billions of dollars of like, just sitting in the bank. They, just that's actually backing all these things, right? Now, I would push back in the sense that I don't know if this actually I could see this kind of thinking applies to some blockchains, but not the good ones. Like, again, if we go back to tokens being utility, not tokens being some kind of stock, not some kind of, just like arbitrary value capture of the network, then I think that this model kind of breaks down. Whereas, I don't think most tokens, for example, if you own a token, you are literally getting a chunk of the fees spent on that network. You hold the token. You could stake the token, which increases the amount of it you have, but really the token value increases based off the utility and the utilization of that token. People wanting to buy the token too for it to be used, for it to use that token, not just to hold it, right? And I think that's kind of the idea there. So when we think about that fee system, I'm not sure if that is the right way to look at a token. That also being said, I'm not sure that we should encourage or be looking for chains which try to extract as much fees from the users as possible. If we were to assume that more fees equals more profit equals better for VCs, and we were to extend that, basically you're encouraging blockchains which don't scale or have models in it which really try to extract as much fees from possible users. Now, there probably is some kind of balance between, a lot of people with little fees means a total high fee value, or a low number of people with a high fee also equals something equal, right? So there's kind of some kind of balance in between those two, and I'm sure there's lots of ways you can extract a lot of fees. But I think alternative models, like I mentioned with Polkadot, where we don't have pay-as-you-go fees to the parachains, we actually have parachains lock-up funds, not pay fees, but still get access to block space. I think that kind of stuff is actually much more interesting for building Web3 applications on. And so when you try to look at Polkadot and say, okay, well, you guys don't have a lot of fee activity on the chain, well, Polkadot is not really a chain for users. We don't want users to use Polkadot. We want L1s to build their platforms on top of Polkadot. We don't want the congestion of Polkadot to be that there's a bunch of users transferring things and doing contracts with that. We want all the block space on Polkadot to be used for L1s. We want all of the activity of users to be on those L1s, like a rollup, right? And then in that case, we currently don't charge fees to the parachains. So, the fee model on Polkadot is basically zero. But again, if you believe that dot token has utility for accessing block space, and you believe that people will want more and more block space in the future, then the dot token itself will increase in value. And VCs, when they invested into the Polkadot ecosystem, they didn't get stocks, they got dot token, a utility token. And that token will increase in value as the utility becomes utilized, right?
Okay, let's try to quantify utility here then. What are your thoughts on the best metrics and KPIs to measure the utility of a token?
Obviously, it's different for different kinds of protocols. We're talking about like L1s, L0s, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think what you want to do is you want to do something like the multiplication of the amount of useful data secured by the network multiplied by the security provided to that data. So like how much data is being secured, and by the way, useful data, not bullshit, random stuff, but actually useful data, and multiplying that by how secure that data is, that is probably closer to what we want. And the reason I say that is because I think we shouldn't look fondly on a bunch of chains which have solved scaling in some way. Like they have lots and lots of transactions, they do support it, but their security guarantees are very weak. Their unstoppability guarantees are very weak, right? Like they basically are centralized databases, and they're saying, oh, we do things super fast. I'm proud that you can do 1 million NFTs for $100, but what compromise did you make to get there? Like how unstoppable are you as a platform? That multiplication thing actually comes into play, right? Where each of these million NFTs not actually secure, right? Potentially. I also think, there is a place for chains that are super secure. Like I think there is a argument to be made for like the Bitcoin chains, which are super, super secure, but not very scalable. And again, the multiplication factor there makes sense because I would say that each Bitcoin is probably a valuable piece of data. The security on those Bitcoin is extremely high. So there is some value to be had there. But I think the more sweet spot is something which is more scalable and has the, still high security. So I think that's kind of the direction I would go for in terms of trying to value a token and value an ecosystem. Again, the problem there is it's very it's very opinionated, right? It's like not really a fixed metric, right?
That's fair. You're definitely onto something there. Now, what I need to do is just think how we could turn that into a comparable metric that people can use to assess the performance of different blockchains on Token Terminal then.
Yeah, as a computer scientist, if I were to think about how to actually measure that, I would be interested in maybe looking at the size of blocks on the chain, because the size of a block on a chain usually is related to the difference in data being brought to the chain, right? The transactions, the state difference, and then looking again at the security behind the data of that chain, like how much the Nakamoto coefficient, or how much money it would take to do a Byzantine attack or whatever on that chain, and something like that might be a way that you could loosely measure that. Now, the only thing that would be hard is to actually measure useful information, right? So looking at just a block and how much data is in it, it could just be a trillion dumb NFTs like kitties or whatever. I would say that those are cool, but not actually as useful as, for example, backing identity layers, social networking layers, that kind of stuff, right? So, but that would be a cool starting point to see some kind of metric. And of course, there's coefficients here. How much do you weight security? How much do you weight the data, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. This is such a fascinating topic to me because as the space matures, these are the things that I feel people will start putting a lot more focus on. How does value accrue to these networks, and how do we actually quantify that value? So this is great stuff. Now, what I want to do next is move on to speak a bit about the current and upcoming developments within the Polkadot ecosystem. And to start off, what would you say are your biggest growth drivers and challenges right now?
So challenges. Challenges are always, I think, the space that we're in. So obviously, we're in a bear market right now. That's a challenge for everyone, right? It's kind of been harder to get users to use it, to trust it. I think, the government is pointing out all these collapses between these central actors which don't represent the blockchain space, but have somehow, become the slogans for our space. And I think that, we're coming through a really tough PR time for the blockchain ecosystem. So that's obviously a challenge for everyone. I think Polkadot specifically, but to be very honest, I think we missed the curve on the last bull market. I think that a lot, and this is based on the challenges of our protocol. I think in the last bull market, a lot of different platforms came to be, right? But a lot of those platforms weren't the multi-chain platform. They were the single chain platform. I'll give an example like Slum as an example. During that bull market, they rose and they were able to bring in a bunch of applications and users in directly to use their platform. Now, Polkadot, again, is not meant to be a hub for users. It's not meant to be a hub for end user applications. It's meant to be a hub for L1s. During our bull market, I think we successfully brought on a bunch of really excited protocols and teams and people adding new parachains to Polkadot, right? But that onboarding curve was, I think, a little bit too slow to actually then let those new L1s building on top of Polkadot to actually provide applications to users, right? So I think we missed the curve in the sense that we onboarded all of the platforms, but we then missed the opportunity to onboard the users onto those platforms. So I think that was kind of where, one of the challenges in terms of, what we see right now, like Polkadot has all the metrics for like the most developers, the highest contribution count, like the most security. I think people always love the technology around Polkadot, but people always kind of ask, where are the users? I think we just missed the last curve. I think that the next bull market, we're going to be ready. We're going to be totally solid and set up for that. And I don't know if in retrospect, there's anything we could have done to fix that. You have to onboard the parachains before you onboard the users. But, this is where I kind of, my personal mindset in terms of the challenges there, right? I also think, and I mentioned there's some things we're solving about this, that there's a lack of hardcore L0, L1 developers. Like if we talk about, the number of Web3 developers in general is quite small, but a lot of them aren't actually core blockchain protocol developers. Like you have thousands of people building smart contracts and thousands of people building like NFT projects and web interfaces and stuff like that, but only literally hundreds of people, if not 100 people who really know how to build a core blockchain protocol, who can actually build that core tech, right? And, if we're building a platform for layer 1 blockchains, you need a lot of those people. And so there are some things we've been doing, like, we've been launching this Polkadot Blockchain Academy, which has been training new hardcore L1 developers. But I think that if we're talking about challenge, there's currently not many people out there in the world who can actually do low-level programming needed for blockchains. And then finally, I would say, I've been talking a lot about, the philosophies of Polkadot, our steadfast belief in unstoppability. And I think that this has been a challenge to Polkadot because the unfortunate truth is I think people in the ecosystem love Ponzonomics. They love token pump, they love bullshit scenarios, they love all these things which aren't actually valuable to the world. And I think that Polkadot, whether it be good or bad, or I don't know if it, in retrospect it's gonna be a good decision or a bad decision, but we really are not playing that game. We are not launching a network which isn't secure, that has tons of tokens but no scalability solution. Like we talk about, again, things like Polygon and Solana, etc. They haven't solved, for example, the data problem, right? Like one of the key issues with Ethereum right now is data bloat, right? You have chains like Polygon, which are basically forks of Ethereum, saying, hey, you can onboard trillions of NFTs for less than a cent a piece. But where are the costs actually implied about those NFTs? Where are the, those are being stored on hundreds and not thousands of nodes. That actually has an impact. What are you doing to actually solve the data availability problem? What are you doing to solve the scalability issues, right? Are you just arbitrarily lowering fees in order to make your blockchain work in the short term? And will it actually scale in the long term? This is, in my opinion, all Ponzonomics. If I wanted to lower the fees on Polkadot, I can make a PR today and literally change a constant to make fees on Polkadot be less than, a billionth of a cent. But we don't do that because that makes your chain attackable, right? And just because there haven't been as many attacks against blockchains today doesn't mean there won't be tomorrow. Like, again, if we're starting to see the government talk about in Congress all of these different blockchains and regulating them, once they realize they can't be regulated, that's when the power of the military and their funds will start going to actually attack these chains and kill the ones that don't play the game. And again, today there's no actor who's dumb enough to spend millions of dollars to attack a chain, but governments will do it, and it's just a matter of time. So I think, we haven't played this Ponzonomics game, which hasn't made us as fruitful in the short term. But I think, one of the things I would say to you is the whole blockchain space is running a race. A lot of teams are sprinting and we're running a marathon. Like Polkadot is running a marathon. And I think that we're very happy with our pace. We're very happy with the outcome of the long tail of things. If you look at blockchain protocols and you say their goal is to be successful in 5 years, even 2 years, whatever, that's not good. Our goal is to be successful and continue to be successful 100 years from now, right? Like literally generational technologies. That was just the challenges. Do you want me to jump into the drivers?
Yeah, let's do drivers and like what are the most exciting things happening on Polkadot right now?
I think I mentioned a lot of this, movement into treasury and movement into crowdfunding and like alternative models outside of, businesses. We have 150 teams in the Builders program. I mentioned that already. We have 40 Parachain teams already launched on Polkadot, and there's more that are in the queue looking to join the network as well. We have the academy I mentioned, trying to train new developers, and the academy. So we're about to launch the third iteration of the academy at UC Berkeley. The other two, we did one in Buenos Aires at UBA. We did one in Cambridge, and these are academies that were like 70 people each, and from them, we turned 30 of them into our ecosystem. We basically made 30 new developers each time join into our ecosystem, and basically as blockchain core developers, whether it be in Polkadot or some of the Parachain teams. So this has been really exciting to basically solve the problem that we need in terms of blockchain developers. I think there's a bunch of new features happening in Polkadot, recently, like things like the asynchronous backing, which has been about like a 10x improvement in throughput for parachains. The pay-as-you-go parachains, which previously were called parathreads, as an alternative to a long-term parachain lease model. You can actually have like a pay-as-you-go fee-based system for actually getting new parachain slots, and a bunch of other feature sets around the system, like things like Ink, our Rust-based smart contract model, is just hitting the limelight. It's just getting used and adopted. It just got an audit from Open Zeppelin, which was really good. A bunch of things. So I think these are all the things that we're prepped really well for the next bull market and the next wave of adoption from users and developers.
That's amazing. We've covered a lot of ground over this session. It's been super insightful. And to wrap this up, just one final question. Outside of everything we already talked about, what is next? Is there anything else that you'd want to share from your mid to long-term roadmap?
I keep it short. I think if I had to predict what the next big factor in Polkadot will be the onboarding story that we're providing. I think we're providing and working on a really slick onboarding story from the dabbler to the committed parachain. So I think we have the smart contract language Ink and a bunch of parachains now that support Ink, which allows any end user, even someone who wants to just do a project at the weekend, to actually build and launch a project on the Polkadot ecosystem. And I think that this was a really important part of what made Ethereum so sticky. Like, I remember when I first got into the blockchain space, that first week that I learned about Ethereum, I launched my first token. I think you can still find it on Ethereum. It's like SJT token, my initials. And I went to like some token minting factory. I bought some ETH on Coinbase, whatever, and I pressed the button and I got a token minted. Like that, just being able to do that is a trigger in the brain. So having that open kind of simple contract platform is simple. Not everyone wants to build a blockchain. Not everyone wants to build, this crazy stuff, but they just want to try it out. So we have now Ink, which is just kind of out there in the limelight, which I think is a really great starting point. Then we have these pay-as-you-go or on-demand parachains, which is a transition. Like if I have a contract and somehow it's doing really well, I want to allocate more secure, more flexible block space than a contract platform. I can then transition my contract into a parachain and pay as you go. It may not be I can afford a full dedicated parachain slot, but I can actually access the block space when I need it, right? And then if that on-demand parachain is very successful, then you can imagine they transition into the long-term parachain slot where they're actually locking up a large amount of money, but getting dedicated, guaranteed block space for the users and themselves, right? And what's nice is this is an entire developer story all wrapped around Rust, all wrapped around our Substrate blockchain platform, and really, I think, paints a story for how you can go from a tinker to launching a business on Polkadot. And I think that will be the catalyst for the big movement here. Whereas I think, again, a lot of other platforms, they stop the headway. For example, if you're building a contract on some other platform, there is no path towards a parachain solution. Every other like L1 that has a contract platform is just a contract platform. They have to scale themselves to be able to scale the block space, which we know hasn't worked in the past. And then again, some of the other sharding solutions don't necessarily have investments in things like smart contract platforms, which will allow the really kind of novice users to onboard. So I think this will be the 100x momentum you'll see in Polkadot.
That is amazing. I truly feel privileged to be having this conversation with you because how long-term you're thinking about everything, how sustainably you're thinking about like building out the ecosystem to build something that is truly unstoppable that lasts. I think these are the discussions that need to be broadcast to the world to slowly start moving away from that focus on Ponzi-nomics and actually show that this is what's going on. So thank you so much, Shawn, for taking the time to share all these insights.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And great questions again.